Time is a fickle mistress. It moves in only one direction, and we're all marching towards the inevitable. What better way to spend what few precious seconds we exist in the universal sandglass than with a JRPG that deals with the subject matter of time? Chrono Trigger, depending on who you ask, is one of the most beloved JRPGs of all time. If you've played it, odds are good it's also one of your favorites. Originally released on the Super Nintendo by Squaresoft in 1995, Chrono Trigger follows the exploits of Chrono, a young man thrust into a time adventure of epic proportions. With artwork done by Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball fame, and some of the most notable tracks by Nobuo Uematsu, you might know him as the guy who usually does the music for Final Fantasy games, many consider Chrono Trigger to be a masterpiece. One might go so far as to call it timeless. So why review an RPG that's been around for over 2 decades, ported to tons of consoles and handhelds, and reviewed by pretty much every person with access to a computer? Because it recently saw a PC release, and the verdict is in. People don't like it. But the million-dollar question is, why don't they like it? We're going to delve a little into what made Chrono Trigger unique for an RPG of its time, and then we'll discuss the actual port itself. Grab your favorite Jules Verne novel, and join us in this review of Chrono Trigger on the PC. Chrono Trigger is a product of its era. It's a JRPG with turn-based combat, a traditional leveling system, and plenty of weapons, armor, and accessories to find and equip along the way. As a result of this age-old method of RPG creation, it's pretty easy to coast through most of the game if you're willing to do a little level grinding early on. It lets you experience the story Chrono Trigger has to offer without having to struggle too much. The impatient will find themselves with a greater challenge than expected, and therefore more headache. Breaking the mold of traditional RPGs at the time was the idea of being able to choose multiple targets on the same enemy. Many turn-based RPGs at the time simply gave you an enemy and you hit them till they went away. Chrono Trigger has numerous fights throughout the game that allow you to play strategically by turning your attacks toward more than just the enemy. For example, one of the game's first enemies to allow this is the Dragon Tank. The Dragon Tank is made up of 3 parts: the Dragon Tank itself, its head, and its wheels. Normally the head heals the other parts and itself, and should be your first target. By eliminating the head, you make the fight much easier. The PC version adds bonus dungeons that were created for the Nintendo DS version. These dungeons don't tack on a ton of extra time, but they do offer unique upgrades for various characters, as well as some other great surprises. If you've never had the chance to play the DS version, and you picked up the PC version, this is a nice little bonus, and should be a permanent addition to every port of Chrono Trigger. Finally, something Chrono Trigger did that many RPGs later followed suit on was New Game Plus, an option afforded to you at the end of the game. All of your equipment, money, levels, and stats carried over from the old game into a fresh new game. Not much changes, but there are various points along the story where you're allowed to fight the game's penultimate boss, Lavos, and it's possible to defeat him much earlier than the game typically allows. To see every ending the game has to offer, and there are quite a few, you need to defeat Lavos at various points in the game. It's even possible to fight Lavos minutes into a new game and win with just Chrono if you've done a lot of grinding and have good gear. As far as graphics and music goes, there's not much to say here that hasn't been said a million times over by every JRPG aficionado that's ever done a review of Chrono Trigger. The sprite work still holds up decades later, and the music will leave you humming various tunes after a long gameplay session. The only issue is that the new higher resolution and bilinear filter doesn't really flatter the game since it just shows its age. The animated cutscenes, though, originally added in the PlayStation version, look surprisingly good here. Now, let's talk about the negative aspects of this port. Perhaps one of the most glaring flaws of this particular port of Chrono Trigger, and by extension the mobile version, are the menus and info/text boxes. They're just god-awful, taking up a larger chunk of the screen than necessary during battles, and looking ugly when you're navigating menus. I could forgive all of this if the font wasn't a complete atrocity. It's the most boring, uninspired, nasty font they could have possibly picked. The text is far too big, and the numbers look horrendous as well. It's understandable for the mobile version because having larger text and numbers lets people see what's going on easier on smartphone screens, but the DS version used the original font and sizes, yet no one seemed to have any issue there. The fact that this wasn't changed for the PC release, or at least given to us as an option, is just one of the many glaringly obvious flaws in this lazy port. Also, I'd love to know how this got past quality assurance. It's also blatant that this port is the mobile version too, as it has the same ugly fonts, menus, and all those lovely leftovers from the mobile version. They could have done something to make it a little less obvious, but I guess that just wasn't within the triple-digit dollar budget to do more than just add resolution options. It's just such a strange realization to know that you can play the PC version of Chrono Trigger with just a mouse, as opposed to the usual controller or keyboard. I mean, for those times when you find yourself at the PC, you want to play a JRPG, and your keyboard is up and left to you. I guess it's nice to have options though. One of the first things you'll notice when you launch the game is options appearing as boxes on the right side of the screen, and it's not immediately obvious what they do. The second one goes to a screen that lets you change resolution, which is par for the course for any PC game. The first one, however, takes you to 17 pages of license information. You know, just in case you happen to be the kind of person who wants to get into the legal semantics of the game you're playing before actually playing the game. I've never in my life seen this in a game before, and it really boggled my mind. Was such a thing necessary? Another thing that really got me about this release is that Chrono Trigger on Steam costs $15. Since the PC version is essentially a lightly edited port of the mobile version, there's very little difference between them, and they're exactly the same content-wise so far as I can tell. So that means you're paying an extra $5 for resolution options. Why pay that much? For that matter, why price the game that much when there's minimal changes? Most people have smartphones these days, and it's $10 on the Google Play Store. That makes the PC version a bit of a slap on the face. Sure, $15 is cheap in the long run, but considering how easy it is to get your hands on more aesthetically pleasing versions of the game, the only benefit to the PC version is that you get to play it on PC and let your friends know you're playing an overtly worse version of Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger by itself as a game is fantastic and always will be. The presentation of this PC port, however, is awful. If you haven't had a look at the Steam reviews for this port, you can get a good idea of just how bad this port is by how thoroughly it's getting blasted. Does the game function as advertised? Absolutely, but it's a lazy cash grab / mobile port, and I expect better from SquareEnix at this point. It's worth noting that as of this review, SquareEnix has stated that they've been hearing all the complaints and are currently assessing them. I'm not entirely certain what they mean by that, but if they at least fix the font and the user interface and remove the bilinear filter, the PC version would at least then be somewhat tolerable. That doesn't fix all of the port's problems, but that's the quickest route to solving a lot of the complaints I've seen about it. Thanks for traveling with us. Before you clock out, join us on social media and Twitch. Links to those will be in the description below. See you next review.